What if a king ended his day seated proudly upon his throne, yet by dawn he was in chains? What if a crown that seemed eternal was taken in a single night, not by open battle, but by whispers in corridors, by daggers in candlelight, by the betrayal of those closest to him? What if thrones themselves were as fragile as glass, glittering in the evening, shattered by morning? This is not only a story of our time. Even now, governments rise and fall overnight. Leaders flee into exile. Banners are changed while people sleep. But long before today, in the Middle Ages, thrones too fell overnight, and coups reshaped kingdoms in silence. And before we wander further, I ask one small kindness. If these calm journeys bring you peace, if they help you in these sleepless hours, remember to like this video and subscribe. It helps keep these stories alive, carried softly from age to age. Now, allow yourself to relax. Adjust your pillow. Loosen the weight of your shoulders. If you have a fan nearby, let it hum quietly in the background. A soft rhythm to carry you deeper into calm. Perhaps dim the lights, or let the room settle into darkness. Breathe slowly, deeply, and let your body grow heavy. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Are you beneath blankets, letting the day dissolve? Are you in a quiet room, headphones on, drifting in stillness? Or perhaps you are traveling far from home, with this voice keeping you company. Share it in the comments. I'd love to know where these echoes of history reach you. Now, let us begin. For in medieval times, power was never secure. Thrones stood high, but beneath them, the ground was always trembling. And in a single night, a ruler's world could collapse. A coup. In our world today, often means tanks rolling through capitals, radio stations seized, presidents whisked away in the dark. But in the Middle Ages, it looked different. The stage was smaller, quieter, yet no less dangerous. Power then was personal. It lived not in parliaments or constitutions, but in crowns, in oaths, in the fragile loyalty of nobles. One king might hold authority by blood, by the blessing of the church, by the allegiance of his knights. But all of it could vanish with a single act of betrayal. Close your eyes. Picture a castle at night. Stone walls rising against a starry sky. The halls inside flickering with torchlight. A king feasts with his companions, laughter echoing against vaulted ceilings. Yet in the shadows, whispers stir. A cousin plotting, a noble hesitating, a servant carrying messages under cloak. Before dawn, the same king may wake to find the gates locked, the guards bribed, the throne no longer his. Coups in the Middle Ages were not always bloody. Many were quiet. A ruler deposed not by battlefields, but by signatures, oaths, and sudden betrayal. A council declaring him unfit. A cousin stepping forward with a stronger claim. A priest withdrawing his blessing. And just like that, power shifted. But they could also be violent. Daggers in a chamber. Poison slipped into a goblet. Assassins striking while candles burned low. The body of a king carried away in silence, a new ruler crowned before the people could stir. In the medieval world, a coup was like a storm breaking without warning. It could arrive in whispers, in signatures, in shadows, or in blood, in fire, in sudden violence. And always, it reminded kings that their crowns were not fixed. They were fragile, trembling, vulnerable to those closest to them. Every ruler, no matter how strong, lived with the knowledge that power might not be lost in war, but in the silence of the night, within his own hall. Coups in the Middle Ages were not thunderclaps on battlefields. They were storms born in silence. In corridors, in chambers, in hushed whispers passed from ear to ear. Close your eyes. Picture a castle at midnight. The walls thick, the torches burning low, their flames bending against draughts that creep through narrow halls. Most of the court sleeps, wrapped in furs, their breathing heavy. But in one corner of the fortress, a handful remain awake. Nobles gathered in secret. Voices low, eyes darting to shadows. A servant listens at the door, then slips away, carrying word to another conspirator. The coup begins not with swords drawn, but with silence. Whispers carry more weight than steel. A promise spoken softly in a corridor. A bargain struck in candlelight. I will stand with you when the gates are opened. If you place the crown upon my head, this land shall be yours. Deals sealed not with ink, but with breath. Oaths traded like weapons. And yet betrayal in this world was not always whispered by strangers. It was often spoken by family. A cousin who believed the throne was rightfully his. A brother who resented the king's power. Even a son, once loyal, persuaded that he could rule better than his father. In such halls, blood ties were threads stretched thin. And in the stillness of night, those threads often snapped. Close your eyes again. Imagine the sudden shift of sound. A key turning softly in a lock. The click echoing louder than a shout. Guards once loyal turning their spears toward the very man they swore to protect. Doors opening, boots rushing across stone floors. A king awakened from sleep by the touch of cold iron at his throat. In one moment he was master of the castle. In the next, a prisoner in his own bed. Some betrayals were drawn out over months, even years. But many unfolded in a single night. A feast by torchlight ending in poisoned wine. A council chamber filled with familiar faces suddenly declaring a ruler unfit. a loyal servant revealing himself to be the sharpest dagger of all. And though these coups seemed small compared to wars, they were often more decisive. For a kingdom could lose its ruler not after years of struggle, but after one night of silence turned to treachery. A crown could pass from one head to another before the dawn broke. Close your eyes once more. Picture the morning after. The people of the city rise from their beds. They open their shutters, step into the streets, and they hear the news whispered from mouth to mouth. The king is gone. Another rules in his place. Some rejoice, some weep, most simply bow. For power has shifted, and the people must bend with it. This was the nature of midnight plots. A dagger in the dark, a poisoned cup, a whispered oath. Coups that did not need battles or armies. For in the Middle Ages, power often fell not with the clash of swords, but with betrayal in silence. In the medieval world, the throne was never safe from strangers, but its greatest danger often sat nearest. Not outside the gates, but within the family hall. Blood was both the crown's anchor and its blade. A king could claim his throne because of blood, and lose it because of blood. For every prince, every cousin, every nephew carried within him a claim. And in the flicker of ambition, that claim could become a weapon. Close your eyes. Picture a great hall. Banners hanging heavy. A fire burning low in the hearth. At the head of the table, a king sits, his crown resting upon his brow, his goblet filled with wine. Around him are not enemies, but kin. A brother, smiling, his eyes too sharp. A cousin, laughing, but glancing too often at the crown. A son, young, eager, impatient. The king feasts among family. Yet perhaps, in that very moment, he is least secure. History tells us of kings undone by those they trusted most. In England, Richard II, grandson of the great Edward III, believed his throne secure. But his cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, waited for his chance. Banished, stripped of inheritance, Henry returned in 1399 with an army. Nobles flocked to his side, whispering that Richard had grown weak. And without a great battle, the throne changed hands. A king betrayed not by foreign enemies, but by his own kin. And this was no isolated tale. In France, too, cousins and brothers battled endlessly during the 100 Years' War. Royal blood turned against itself, the throne a prize contested not only by England, but by rival branches of the same dynasty. The Burgundians and Armagnacs, both French, both kin to the crown, tore the kingdom apart in their quest for power. Even the Byzantines, far to the east, were plagued by the same fate. Princes and brothers rising against emperors, seizing Constantinople in coups that unfolded in torchlit corridors. A brother might blind his sibling to claim the throne, for in Byzantine law, a blinded man could not rule. The cruelty was intimate. A crown gained at the cost of a brother's eyes. Close your eyes again. Think of the silence of a chamber late at night. A king asleep in his bed, unaware that his son plots with nobles 2 rooms away. A cousin swearing loyalty in council by day, but in secret preparing soldiers for a midnight strike. The very men who dined with him, laughed with him, knelt before him, now sharpening the daggers of betrayal. And what made family betrayal so dangerous was not only the act, but its power of persuasion. When a stranger claimed a crown, the people doubted. But when a brother, or a cousin, or a son claimed it, the people hesitated. For was he not of the same blood? Did not the same veins carry royal right? The throne itself wavered when family stood against family. Close your eyes once more. Imagine the morning after such a coup. The heralds cry out in the marketplace. The crown now rests upon the brow of the king's son, or cousin, or brother. And though the people whisper of betrayal, they also nod. For blood itself lends legitimacy, and loyalty drifts like a shadow, turning swiftly to the new ruler. The lesson was cruel. That in the medieval world, a king was never safest in the arms of family. For the warm smile of a cousin might conceal ambition. The loyal embrace of a son might carry impatience. And the crown, glittering in firelight, might be the prize that made blood betray blood. A king in the Middle Ages wore a crown. But the weight of that crown did not rest on gold alone. It rested upon the shoulders of the nobles who stood behind him. For no ruler, no matter how fierce, could govern without them. The nobles held the castles, the knights, the wealth of land. They commanded the farmers who tilled fields, the soldiers who marched, the rents that filled coffers. And their loyalty was both treasure and threat. One day it upheld the king. The next, it could sweep him from his throne. Close your eyes. Picture a council chamber in England. Long tables lit by candles, shadows stretching across stone walls. The king sits at the head, his robes heavy, his voice steady. Around him, earls and dukes, each with their own banners, their own ambitions. They nod as he speaks. But their eyes wander. Some murmur agreements. Others exchange glances. And though the king believes himself master, the truth is more delicate. For if too many nobles shift their weight, the throne itself trembles. It was often the nobles who made or unmade kings. Henry Bolingbroke, who rose against Richard II, succeeded because the lords of England rallied to his cause. They swore that Richard had failed in his duties. And with their banners behind Henry, the crown slipped from Richard's brow almost without resistance. And in France, during the 100 Years' War, the power of nobles was so great that kings themselves became pawns. The Burgundian dukes and the Armagnac faction fought not only for influence, but for the crown's very soul. A king might be crowned in Reims with church blessing. But if the nobles abandoned him, his authority dissolved like mist. Close your eyes again. Picture a medieval banquet. The hall filled with laughter, wine poured freely, music drifting from lutes and flutes. The king raises a goblet. But at another table, two nobles lean close, whispering. Their words weave treachery. Promises of land, of privilege, of power if they support another claimant. By the time the music ends, the fate of the throne may already be sealed. The nobles were kingmakers. They demanded promises, rewards, lands, titles. And when a king failed to deliver, or angered them with taxes, or overlooked their importance, they turned swiftly. A rebellion flared, or worse, a coup brewed in silence. And the king, despite his crown, found himself outnumbered in his own realm. It was not only military power that gave nobles such weight. It was their closeness. They dined with the king, hunted with him, fought at his side. They swore oaths of loyalty. But those oaths could be broken as easily as a thread pulled loose from a cloak. Close your eyes once more. Imagine a baron kneeling before his king, swearing eternal loyalty, his hand upon the cross. The king smiles, believing the oath true. But later that night, in a candlelit chamber, the same baron leans toward another noble and whispers, "Tomorrow, we ride for his cousin instead." The power of the throne hangs not on armies or gold, but on the shifting breath of men like him. This was the danger of nobles in the medieval world. They were both shield and dagger. A king could not rule without them. But he could not always rule with them. Their loyalty was conditional, fragile, often purchased with land and privilege. And when the balance tipped, when too many turned away, the throne itself collapsed. Coups in medieval times were not always explosions of violence. Often, they were the slow turning of noble loyalty. One banner lowered, another raised. And before the people even understood, the king was gone. The nobles, in their castles and courts, were the hidden architects of coups. Their whispers as deadly as any sword. Their choices deciding who would wear the crown. And who would lose it overnight. In the medieval world, crowns were not only made of gold. They were made of faith. For no king could truly rule without the blessing of the church. Close your eyes. Picture a coronation. A great cathedral filled with incense. Sunlight streaming through stained glass, coloring the air in red and gold. At the center kneels a king, stripped of crown and sword, humbled before the altar. The bishop raises holy oil, anoints his head, his chest, his hands. The choir sings, the bells toll. And when the crown is placed upon his head, it is not only gold he wears. It is divine authority. He is no longer just a man. He is God's chosen ruler. This was the power of the church. It gave legitimacy. It wrapped kings in the cloak of heaven's approval. But just as easily, it could strip that cloak away. Excommunication. The word alone carried terror. For when the pope or bishop declared a ruler cut off from the church, it meant his soul was damned, his reign cursed, his authority void. Nobles who once swore loyalty now hesitated. Subjects whispered. and rivals sharpened their daggers, knowing the throne had lost its divine shield. Close your eyes again. Imagine a king seated upon his throne, proud and fierce. Yet outside the walls of his hall, the bells of the cathedral toll against him. The priests refuse his commands. The Pope himself declares him unfit to rule. The people murmur, "If God has turned from him, why should we obey?" In that moment, his crown grows heavy, fragile. And a coup, waiting in shadows, suddenly finds strength. It was not only curses that mattered. Blessings too shaped thrones. When nobles plotted to overthrow a king, they often sought the church's approval first. For a usurper without holy sanction risked being seen as a traitor. But a usurper blessed at the altar could claim to be God's chosen. And the people, hearing sermons from pulpits, bowed to the new order. In England, in France, across the Holy Roman Empire, bishops and popes played this double game. They stood as guardians of morality, yet also as arbiters of power. A king who quarreled with the church risked more than excommunication. He risked his throne itself. Think of King John of England. In his quarrel with Pope Innocent III, John was excommunicated. His kingdom placed under interdict, churches closed, sacraments denied. The people feared their souls lost, their land cursed. And in that shadow, John's authority crumbled. His barons grew restless. And soon, his power slipped away into rebellion and submission. Close your eyes once more. Imagine how a noble plotting a coup might kneel before a bishop. "Bless my cause," he whispers. "If I overthrow him, I will protect the church. I will grant you lands, privileges, freedom." And the bishop nods. On Sunday, he preaches to the people that the king has strayed. That another must rise in his place. And when the coup comes, the people accept it not as treason, but as God's will. The church was not only a shadow. It was a sword. A weapon invisible, sharper than steel, carried not in hands but in words. And no king, however mighty, could ignore it. Coups in the Middle Ages were never just political. They were spiritual. They unfolded not only in castles and chambers, but in cathedrals and pulpits. For when the church withdrew its blessing, or gave it to another, the throne itself could topple overnight. England. A land of green fields and grey castles. A land where oaths of loyalty were spoken by day and broken by night. Where kings wore crowns heavy with tradition, but never safe from betrayal. Few stories capture this better than the fall of Richard II. A king born of royal blood, grandson of Edward III, heir to England's proud line. Crowned as a boy, Richard grew into a ruler who believed in the majesty of kingship. He sat upon his throne with dignity, spoke of his divine right, demanded obedience. But the crown he wore was never as secure as he imagined. Close your eyes. Picture Westminster Hall in the late 14th century. Tapestries hang upon the walls, knights in armor bow low, courtiers whisper in corners. At the center sits Richard, his crown gleaming in candlelight. But around him, the air is restless. Nobles murmur of his extravagance, his favorites, his arrogance. Whispers drift like smoke, the king is weak. He cannot govern. He is unfit. Among those whispers was his cousin, Henry Bolingbroke. Once exiled, stripped of inheritance, Henry nursed a quiet grievance. While Richard basked in the rituals of kingship, Henry built alliances. He waited, patient as the tide, until the moment arrived. In 1399, Richard left for Ireland, seeking to subdue unrest. And while he was gone, Henry returned to England's shores. Not with a vast army, not with endless banners, but with quiet support. One noble house after another bent to his cause. Barons, resentful of Richard, saw in Henry a chance for new favor, new promises. And their loyalty shifted silently. Close your eyes again. Picture the return of Richard. He lands upon English soil, expecting obedience. But the castles he rides to are closed against him. The nobles who once feasted at his table now stand behind Henry. Even the common people, weary of Richard's rule, whisper support for his cousin. The king's circle shrinks with each passing day. It was not a battle that undid him. No great clash of swords or shields. But silence. Silence as doors shut. Silence as banners lowered. Silence as once loyal men turned their backs. Richard, once proud, found himself isolated. Abandoned. Powerless. Captured and brought to London, Richard was forced to resign his crown. Imagine the scene. A king who once demanded obedience now standing in a chamber, surrounded by nobles who look upon him not as sovereign, but as a man to be unmade. He hands over the crown, the orb, the scepter. Symbols that had once carried divine authority now slipping from his grasp. And Henry Bolingbroke, his cousin, steps forward. Crowned as Henry IV, the first of the Lancastrian kings. A dynasty born not of foreign conquest, but of betrayal in blood. Close your eyes once more. Picture the night after Richard's abdication. The people of London stir in the streets, gossiping by torchlight. Some rejoice, some remain fearful. But all accept. For the throne has shifted. And in the medieval world, loyalty flowed not to ideals, but to power itself. Richard's fate was cruel. Imprisoned in Pontefract Castle, he would never leave alive. His crown lost not on the battlefield, but in the silence of betrayal, the turning of noble hearts, the ambition of kin. This was England's night of betrayals. A reminder that even a king who sat in splendor, who wore the crown by blood and law, could wake to find it gone. Not with armies at his gate, but with whispers in the dark. if England's crown trembled in the hands of cousins and nobles. Then France's throne shivered like a leaf in the wind. For in France, the crown was not only threatened from within, it was battered from without. By war, by famine, by plague, by endless struggle. Close your eyes. Picture France in the 14th and 15th centuries. Its land vast and fertile, its castles proud, its kings crowned in the Cathedral of Reims with sacred oil. And yet, the crown that glittered on those kings' brows was never steady. It wavered beneath the weight of war, beneath the shifting loyalty of nobles. And in the shadows, coups brewed like storms. The 100 Years' War. A conflict that stretched across generations. England claimed rights to the French crown through Edward III. And from that claim sprang a war that bled both kingdoms dry. But in France, the war was more than battle with England. It was a battle within itself. Close your eyes again. Picture the French court. Divided, suspicious, restless. On one side, the Burgundians. Powerful dukes whose lands stretched rich across the north. On the other, the Armagnacs. Noble allies who sought to control the young king. Both factions claimed loyalty to France. But their loyalty was to themselves first. The king's crown became a prize to be pulled back and forth. And coups, both silent and violent, shook the throne again and again. At the heart of this turmoil stood Charles VI. A king crowned with majesty, but cursed with madness. In his youth, he ruled with strength. But illness overtook him, his mind faltering. At times he did not know his own name, did not recognize his wife, his children, his throne. A king who could not rule became a kingdom that could not stand steady. And into that weakness poured ambition. The Burgundians seized control. They placed themselves as protectors, claiming to rule in the king's stead. But soon the Armagnacs challenged them. The court split, the nobles armed themselves, and Paris became a city of daggers. By day, men walked in silks. By night, they whispered of betrayal, sharpened blades, planned assassinations. Close your eyes once more. Imagine the narrow streets of medieval Paris. The flicker of torches against timber walls. Burgundian soldiers patrolling, Armagnac spies lurking in shadows. Neighbors whispering, fearful of choosing the wrong side. For at any hour, power could shift. One night the Burgundians ruled. The next, the Armagnacs claimed the palace. And in this chaos, England struck. Henry V crossed the Channel, his banners snapping in the wind. At Agincourt, he broke French armies, cut down knights in heaps. And in the vacuum of French disunity, the English claimed not just land, but the crown of France itself. Think of the shame of that moment. A French king alive, yet powerless. A foreign ruler, in London, declaring himself heir to France's throne. And why? Because France was not united. because its nobles, its factions, had weakened it from within. Coups in council chambers became open gates on the battlefield. Yet even here, betrayal turned again. The Duke of Burgundy, once allied with England, shifted loyalties. He saw advantage in supporting Charles VII, the Dauphin. And suddenly, the tide turned once more. But not by battle alone. For into this turmoil stepped an unlikely figure. Not a noble, not a king, not a seasoned general. But a young woman. Joan of Arc. Her visions, her voice, her courage lifted the banner of France. And with her came not just soldiers, but faith. She led armies, she raised sieges, she crowned Charles at Rheims. And in that sacred act, the throne of France steadied. But only for a moment. For Joan herself was betrayed. Captured, sold, burned. Her death another reminder that in medieval Europe, loyalty was a fragile thread. And those who held power were never safe from the knife. Close your eyes again. See the French throne across these centuries. One day held by Burgundians. The next, by Armagnacs. 1 year claimed by the English. The next reclaimed by Charles. Kings crowned, kings abandoned, nobles shifting with the wind. Every change another coup, another fracture, another reminder of how fragile crowns could be. France endured. Yes. But the endurance came not from the steadiness of its throne. It came from surviving betrayal after betrayal, coup after coup, storm after storm. And the story of France in these years was not the story of one king, but of a crown forever trembling, never secure. Italy in the Middle Ages and Renaissance was not a single kingdom. It was a patchwork. A quilt of city-states, each proud, each ambitious, each fiercely independent. Florence, Milan, Venice, Rome. Cities of art, trade, beauty. But also of betrayal. For behind every cathedral dome and marketplace fountain, there were daggers in the dark. Coups in Italy were not exceptions. They were traditions. Close your eyes. Picture Florence in the 15th century. The bells of the Duomo tolling. Merchants selling silks and spices in the piazzas. Scholars debating in candlelit rooms. Artists sketching visions of saints and angels. The city glimmers with wealth and learning. But beneath its cobblestones, beneath the painted ceilings, power flows in whispers. Here rose the Medici. Bankers who became kings without a crown. Cosimo de' Medici, called Pater Patri, father of his country, ruled not by armies, but by gold. He financed churches, sponsored artists, lent money to princes and popes. But wealth alone did not keep him safe. His enemies plotted to remove him, to exile him, to undo his family's hold. And more than once, coups stirred in Florence's streets. Think of the Pazzi conspiracy in 1478. On a bright April morning, the cathedral filled with worshippers. Lorenzo de' Medici and his brother Giuliano knelt at Mass. And suddenly, daggers flashed. Conspirators struck. Giuliano fell in a pool of blood. Lorenzo barely escaped with his life. A coup, planned in shadows, played out in sacred space. But it failed. The Medici endured. And the conspirators were hunted, hanged from the very windows of Florence's palaces. Close your eyes again. Now drift north to Milan. The Visconti and later the Sforza ruled a city of towers and soldiers. But their reigns were marked by betrayal as much as triumph. Plots in council chambers. Poison in goblets. Rival families scheming to place their own upon the ducal throne. In Milan, power was not inherited peacefully. It was seized, again and again, in blood and silence. And in Rome, the papacy itself became a throne contested by coups. Popes were elected, yes. But behind the election lay bribery, intimidation, and sometimes open force. The Borgias, infamous in history, turned intrigue into an art. Rodrigo Borgia, who became Pope Alexander VI, secured his power through deals, marriages, and shadows. His son Cesare Borgia, a prince in armor, carved territories for himself with sword and poison alike. To the Borgias, a coup was not only an event. It was a way of life. Close your eyes once more. Imagine walking the narrow streets of Florence at night. The sound of footsteps behind you. The sudden strike of a blade. A man silenced before he could reach his home. By morning, the city whispers, another plot. Another betrayal. Another name erased. And yet life goes on. Merchants open stalls, bells toll, painters paint. Because in Italy, coups were not interruptions. They were rhythms. Part of the very music of politics. Coups here did not always wear the armor of knights. Sometimes they wore silk robes, ink-stained fingers, jeweled rings. They were not only fought with swords, but with contracts, marriages, and assassinations. A banker's loan could topple a duke. A poisoned chalice at supper could shift the fate of a city overnight. This was the nature of Italy. Glorious, radiant, and treacherous. Where beauty and betrayal walked hand in hand. And where thrones, even without crowns, fell as swiftly as they rose. In Germany, the medieval crown was unlike that of England or France. There was no single kingdom, no throne that stood unchallenged above all. Instead, there was the Holy Roman Empire. A patchwork of principalities, duchies, bishoprics, free cities. Each one proud, each one fiercely protective of its rights. And at the center, an emperor. A figure meant to embody unity. Yet his power was never secure. Never absolute. Close your eyes. Picture the map of medieval Germany. It is not a single kingdom shaded one color. It is a mosaic, 100 small realms stitched together. The Duke of Saxony, the Margrave of Brandenburg, the Bishop of Mainz. Each one powerful, each one armed, each one capable of turning against the emperor at a moment's notice. Coups here did not always look like midnight daggers or sieges. They often looked like councils, great gatherings of electors. 7. Then later more, nobles and bishops with the sacred right to choose the king of the Romans. They sat in halls filled with banners and incense. And with their votes, they could crown a ruler, or cast him aside. An emperor might believe himself chosen by God, but in truth, his fate often rested in the hands of men sitting across wooden tables. Close your eyes again. Imagine an emperor in his palace. He believes himself secure. Yet in Frankfurt or Mainz, electors gather without him. They whisper of his failures, his broken promises, his heavy taxes. And with quills upon parchment, they sign their names to support another. A rival prince rides forward, crowned with their blessing. And suddenly, the emperor who wore the crown yesterday is only a man in exile today. A coup not with swords, but with pens. Yet swords, too, were drawn. German principalities were fertile ground for rebellion. If an emperor pressed too hard, demanded too much, nobles simply raised their banners in defiance. Armies clashed not always for conquest, but for recognition. Whose authority do we follow? The emperor's, or another's? And as in England, as in France, nobles became kingmakers. Their castles were fortresses not just of stone, but of political weight. Close your eyes once more. Picture a small German city. A free imperial city, its council proud of its autonomy. The emperor sends a tax collector, demands obedience. But in the night, the city gates are shut. The council gathers in secret. They declare their loyalty to another prince, or to no one at all. And just like that, the emperor's power has shrunk. A quiet coup in a single town. No battles, no sieges. Only the closing of gates, the silence of defiance. The church also weighed heavily here. For many of the electors were bishops, men of both faith and politics. Their blessing or their withdrawal could crown or topple an emperor overnight. One word of excommunication, and suddenly nobles felt free to betray. One papal bull of support, and a rival could rise to legitimacy in a single day. German history is filled with emperors who wore crowns but not control. Frederick II, brilliant and ambitious, struggled against papal curses and noble rebellions. Charles IV, shrewd and careful, secured his throne by bargaining with electors. Each emperor walked a narrow road, forever dependent on those beneath him. And when he stumbled, the crown could slip swiftly away. This was the nature of German coups. Not always daggers in the dark, but parchments signed in halls. Not always bloody sieges, but sudden withdrawals of loyalty. The shifting breath of electors, the closing of a city gate, the whisper of a bishop. And the throne of the Holy Roman Empire trembled. Power here was never absolute. It was always negotiated, always fragile. And for many emperors, the fear was constant, that their reign might end not with a sword at their throat, but with quills scratching in silence. If England trembled with betrayal, and France swayed with factions, then Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire, was the very capital of coups. For in Constantinople, the world's greatest city, thrones rose and fell with dizzying speed. An emperor might walk in silk, crowned with jewels, paraded through streets of marble in the morning. And by nightfall, he could be in chains, blinded, or cast into exile. Close your eyes. Picture Constantinople at dusk. The golden dome of Hagia Sophia glowing in the fading light. Walls stretching vast across land and sea. Markets still buzzing, courtyards filled with incense, the voices of monks echoing in choirs. At the heart of it all, the great palace. Halls of mosaics, fountains, marble floors. It seemed eternal, unshakable, the heart of empire. Yet within those halls, the throne was perhaps the most fragile in all the medieval world. In Byzantium, emperors were not only rulers. They were symbols of heaven on earth. Crowned with holy oil, draped in purple, believed to be chosen by God. But this divine majesty did not shield them from betrayal. If nobles, generals, or churchmen turned against them, the people quickly followed. And the throne, no matter how glittering, could be stripped away overnight. Close your eyes again. Picture a midnight plot in the great palace. A general, jealous of power, whispers to guards in the corridors. Gold passes from hand to hand. Promises made in hurried voices. The torches burn low. A door creaks open. Soldiers rush into the emperor's chamber. The ruler, startled from sleep, sees the steel glint of swords. In moments, he is dragged from his bed. And by dawn, another sits upon the throne. This was no rare occurrence. In fact, it was routine. Byzantine history is filled with emperors toppled by coups. Michael V dragged into exile after only a year. Isaac II deposed by his own brother. Andronikos I, seized by an angry mob, torn apart in the streets. The throne was not a seat of safety. It was a target. Blinding became the chosen method of disqualification. For in Byzantine law, a blinded man could not rule. Close your eyes once more. Imagine the horror of it. An emperor, once revered, held down as iron sears his eyes. The crowd outside hears the news. He has been blinded. He can never rule again. And before the blood dries, another is crowned. Power slipping not only through betrayal, but through mutilation. But it was not only Byzantium. Across Eastern Europe, thrones were just as fragile. In Hungary, Poland, and Bulgaria, Kings were raised and toppled by nobles restless for power. Czars in the Balkans rose high, only to be slain by cousins, rivals, even their own soldiers. The crowns glittered, yes. But beneath the glitter, daggers waited. And still, Constantinople was the stage where this drama played most vividly. For here, the people themselves played a role. Crowds could be swayed by speeches in the Hippodrome. One day they shouted praise for an emperor, hailing him as chosen by God. The next, they roared for his downfall, dragging him from the palace, crowning another in his place. The will of the crowd, the whispers of nobles, the nod of a bishop, the betrayal of a guard. Together, they made and unmade emperors overnight. Close your eyes again. Picture the coronation of one emperor in Hagia Sophia. The incense rising. Choirs thundering. The crown set upon his brow. The people cheer, the bells ring. But already, in the corners of the city, in the chambers of generals, in the whispers of nobles, plots stir. The same man who basks in glory today may be dragged to prison tomorrow. This was Byzantium. A world where thrones were gilded with gold and yet stood on fragile ground. A city where power shone brightly, but burned quickly. Where coups were not exceptions. They were part of the rhythm of rule. Far to the north, where winter nights stretched long, and summers were brief flashes of light. The thrones of Scandinavia trembled as much as any in the medieval world. Norway, Sweden, Denmark. Kingdoms carved by axe and shield, shaped by proud clans and restless nobles. Here, too, rulers rose in glory and fell overnight. Close your eyes. Picture a timber hall in Norway, snow pressed against its roof, firelight flickering upon carved beams. A king sits with warriors, their cloaks heavy with fur, their goblets filled with mead. They toast his rule, swear oaths of loyalty. And yet, among them, some eyes burn with envy. Some hands grip their cups too tightly, some smiles last too long. For in Scandinavia, loyalty was always fragile. Norway's sagas whisper of kings toppled not by foreign armies, but by their own kin. Brothers turning against brothers. Sons rising against fathers. Cousins claiming crowns by force. One moment a hall echoed with feasting, the next with the clash of steel. And in these sudden storms, thrones shifted swiftly. In Sweden, power was never steady. Nobles and clans gathered in councils, known as the Thing. Here, kings were chosen, confirmed, sometimes dismissed. A ruler who lost their support could be deposed without battle. His name struck from loyalty, his banner lowered, another raised in his place. Coups here were not always bloody, but they were final. A king without the support of the Thing was no king at all. Close your eyes again. Picture Stockholm in the late Middle Ages. Narrow streets along the water, merchants unloading ships, townsfolk gossiping in taverns. A king's banners flutter above the castle walls. Yet in a candlelit room, nobles whisper. They are weary of taxes, weary of favoritism, weary of war. And by morning, the gates are opened to another claimant. The crown shifts, silently, without a blow struck. Denmark, too, saw crowns pass like drifting snow. The Kalmar Union in 1397 sought to bind Norway, Sweden, and Denmark under one crown. But unity was fragile. Ambitious nobles in each land resented being ruled from afar. Coups stirred, rebellions flared. One ruler proclaimed, another driven out. For a union made in ceremony was broken by betrayal. Close your eyes once more. Imagine a king in Denmark, seated at council. He believes his rule stretches across the north. But outside, his nobles gather with armed retainers. They storm the chamber, demand his abdication, place another upon the throne. And by evening, the crown that glistened upon his brow has already been carried elsewhere. The sagas speak of these changes with calm acceptance. For in the north, kingship was not fixed. It was a prize contested, a seat earned only as long as loyalty lasted. And when loyalty broke, when oaths dissolved, a throne could fall as quickly as snow melts in spring. Scandinavian coups remind us that even in lands of fierce warriors and proud traditions, the crown was never safe. It glittered in firelight, but its roots were shallow. And the halls of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark echoed again and again with the sound of power falling overnight. Not every coup thundered with armies. Not every throne toppled with banners raised and gates thrown wide. Some of the most decisive coups came instead in silence. Through a goblet, a dagger, a soft footstep in the night. Assassination. The weapon that requires no battlefield. No marching banners. No declaration of war. Just patience, access, and the courage, or cruelty, to strike at the heart of power. Close your eyes. Picture a medieval feast. The hall glitters with candlelight. The air heavy with the smell of roasted meats and spiced wine. A king laughs with his nobles, goblet in hand. Musicians play softly. Servants carry platters. And in that noise, no one notices the small vial poured into the wine. No one hears the whispered prayer of the servant tasked with betrayal. The king drinks, smiles, raises his cup again. And within the hour, his breath falters. His skin pales. His crown slips unseen from his brow. Poison was the quietest coup. It could be delivered at banquets, slipped into chalices, hidden in stews. And when a king died, it could be called sickness, accident, fate. The dagger left traces. But poison could vanish like smoke. Close your eyes again. Now picture a bedchamber at night. The torches burn low. The guards at the door grow weary, their heads heavy. A servant trusted for years enters quietly. But in his hand is not a basin of water, nor a tray of food. It is a dagger. He approaches the bed where a king sleeps soundly. The blade glimmers once in the dark, and by morning the throne is vacant. The servant gone, and another man stands ready to claim it. History is full of such shadows. In Byzantium, emperors were dragged from their beds, blinded or slain so their rivals could take the throne. No great battles. Only torches in the night, soldiers slipping through corridors, a body cast aside. A palace coup, silent but absolute. In Italy, assassinations often played out in churches or public squares. The Pazzi conspiracy against the Medici struck not on a battlefield, but during Mass in Florence's cathedral. Knives flashing where prayers were spoken. One brother slain on holy ground, another fleeing for his life. And though that coup failed, others succeeded. For in Italy's city-states, poison and daggers were as common as armies. Even in England, kings and nobles lived in fear of such ends. Some were said to have died by God's will. Yet whispers lingered of poison or secret murder. For when a ruler fell suddenly, without war, without illness, the people knew betrayal had passed silently through the gates. Close your eyes once more. Imagine the unease of every meal, every goblet raised, every chamber entered at night. For a king could command armies. He could build castles. He could wear crowns of gold. But he could not command trust. He could never know if the servant kneeling at his side was loyal, or waiting for the moment to strike. This was the silent weapon of coups. It did not need soldiers or sieges. It needed only one hand, one chance, one moment when a king was unguarded. And the crown passed quietly from one head to another. Assassinations remind us of the fragility of medieval thrones. That sometimes power was not lost in years of war, but in a single sip of wine, a single stroke of steel. A coup written not in blooded fields, but in silence. For every throne that fell overnight, there were others that remained upright. Not because loyalty held firm, but because betrayal was uncovered too soon. Because whispers carried too far, or because a conspirator's courage faltered at the edge of action. And when a coup failed, its punishment was never light. Close your eyes. Picture a chamber filled with conspirators, gathered in candlelight. Their faces tense, their voices low, their hands trembling as they swear oaths. They plan to strike before dawn. The guards will be bribed. The gates unlatched. The king surprised in his hall. But one man, filled with doubt, slips away. Perhaps he fears damnation. Perhaps he fears discovery. He goes instead to the king's captain, whispers what he knows. And before the coup can unfold, soldiers storm the conspirators' meeting place. Daggers are seized. Parchments burned. Men dragged into the street. The coup dies before it is born. Many plots unraveled this way. Not through strength of kings, but through weakness of traitors. For in every conspiracy, trust was fragile. One tongue too loose, one servant too frightened, one whisper overheard, and the plan collapsed like ash in the wind. Close your eyes again. Imagine a noble who enters a feast, dagger hidden beneath his cloak. He means to strike the king during the toast. The music swells, the goblets rise. But at the last moment, he hesitates. His courage drains. The dagger remains sheathed. Later, the weapon is discovered, and his fate is sealed. A failed coup does not pass unnoticed. It is punished swiftly, brutally. History remembers such punishments. In Florence, the conspirators of the Pazzi plot who failed to kill Lorenzo de' Medici were hanged from the windows of the Palazzo Vecchio. Their bodies swayed above the streets, a warning to all who might think of treachery. In England, nobles who failed to unseat Henry IV or Henry V were dragged through streets, executed before crowds, their heads displayed upon spikes. In France, Armagnac and Burgundian plots that faltered ended with whole families imprisoned, tortured, erased. Close your eyes once more. Picture the silence of a prison at midnight. A conspirator sits upon the cold stone floor, chains upon his wrists. Only days earlier, he imagined himself wearing a crown, or standing beside a new king. Now he waits for the executioner's axe. His whispers turned to ash. His ambition turned to dust. Failed coups remind us of the thin line between triumph and ruin. One night of courage could crown a usurper. One moment of hesitation could end him forever. Those who conspired lived with the knowledge that success meant power. But failure meant death. And yet, men still tried. Again and again, they plotted, whispered, schemed. For the lure of the throne was too strong. Even knowing the price of failure, ambition burned. And so thrones remained fragile. Not only because of the coups that succeeded, but because of the endless attempts that nearly did. When we think of coups, we imagine nobles whispering in torchlight, brothers plotting in chambers, generals bribing guards at night. But beneath all of this, beneath the silks, beneath the crowns, there was always the people. Peasants in their fields, merchants in their stalls, townsfolk in their narrow streets. They may not have held swords gilded in silver, or sat in councils with bishops. But their presence, their murmurs, their willingness to rise or to remain silent, could decide whether a coup survived or crumbled into dust. Close your eyes. Picture a medieval marketplace at dawn. The stalls are just opening, the smell of bread rising from ovens, the chatter of merchants filling the air. Suddenly, a herald appears. His voice echoes across the square, "The king is dead. Long live the new king." The people pause. Hands frozen above baskets, coins still in palms. Some whisper in surprise. Some bow their heads quickly, accepting the new name. Others murmur uneasily. But all know, in that moment, that power has shifted, and their reactions will ripple outward like stones cast into water. For the people were more than passive. They were witnesses. And witnesses gave legitimacy. A coup might unfold in silence within a castle, but if the townsfolk rejected it, riots could erupt. Markets could close. Gates could be barred. An emperor in Byzantium could be crowned in Hagia Sophia, yet if the crowd in the Hippodrome shouted against him, his reign was already doomed. The people were not armies, yet they were multitudes. And multitudes are power. Close your eyes again. Imagine the night of a coup. Nobles seize a king. Guards switch allegiance. A usurper is crowned by torchlight. At dawn, the people gather outside the palace, waiting, watching. If they cheer, the coup takes root. If they jeer, the usurper trembles. If they riot, soldiers must act, blood may spill, and the fragile new crown may topple before it warms the usurper's brow. This tension played out across the medieval world. In Constantinople, the Hippodrome was the pulse of power. Tens of thousands of citizens could fill its seats, shouting in unison, demanding the fall of an emperor. Sometimes, their voices alone forced abdications. Other times, emperors bought their silence with gifts of bread, gold, or promises of reform. The crowd was unpredictable, both shield and sword, and no ruler in Byzantium ignored it. For to do so was to risk being dragged from the palace by the very people he ruled. In England, during Richard II's fall, the people mattered deeply. Many in London turned their loyalty to Henry Bolingbroke, cheering his arrival, whispering of his strength. For Richard had lost not only noble support, but popular trust. The people, weary of his rule, accepted the change almost eagerly. Without their acceptance, Henry's coup would have been far bloodier. But with their silence, and sometimes with their cheers, it became smooth, almost inevitable. In France, during the 100 Years' War, towns often decided which faction held power. Paris, especially, was a city of coups. 1 week under Burgundian control, the next under the Armagnacs. The people filled the streets with anger, with torches, with voices demanding change. Sometimes they opened gates to one faction. Sometimes they closed them against another. The throne of France itself trembled upon the shouts of butchers, artisans, and apprentices. Close your eyes once more. Picture the ordinary peasant in his village. He hears rumors from afar. A king deposed, a new ruler crowned. He may never see the palace, never meet the king. But he knows the weight of taxes, the call for soldiers, the burden of war. If the new ruler promises relief, the peasant's loyalty tilts silently in his favor. If betrayal deepens, rebellion stirs. And rebellion, even from farmers with pitchforks, can light the spark of greater fires. The people were not only subjects. They were the breath of the kingdom. Their labor fed the nobles, their coin filled the coffers, their prayers filled the churches. And when they withheld that labor, that coin, that prayer, a coup could falter. Failed plots often collapsed when towns refused to accept them, when markets shut in protest, when priests in villages refused to bless the usurper's name, when gates remained barred at night. Even the sharpest dagger in a chamber could not secure power without the quiet nod of the people. But when the people stirred in anger, coups sometimes grew from below. Urban uprisings became coups in their own right. In Florence, mobs helped defend the Medici when conspiracies threatened. In Constantinople, mobs tore down emperors with their bare hands. In England, peasants' revolts shook the very balance of royal power, reminding kings that their rule was not untouchable. Close your eyes again. Imagine a torchlit crowd filling the square before a castle. Their voices rise in chants, their faces lit by fire. Inside the hall, a usurper listens. If the crowd roars his name, he feels secure. If they curse him, he feels the tremor of fear. For no crown, however golden, can endure without the acceptance, or at least the silence, of the people who live beneath it. This is the truth of the medieval coup. That it was never only a game of nobles and kings. It was always played, quietly or loudly, upon the stage of the people. Their silence gave consent. Their anger sparked rebellion. And their presence made every coup either triumph or disaster. The people may not have held crowns, but they held the ground beneath them. And when that ground shifted, even the most powerful throne could fall overnight. A throne, in the medieval world, seemed solid. Carved of oak, adorned with gold, set high above all others. Yet beneath its weight, there was always a tremor. The fragility of thrones was not in the wood, or the crown, or the robes. It was in the loyalties, the oaths, the shifting winds of men and women who surrounded power. Close your eyes. Picture a king seated in his hall. The fire burns warmly. Banners hang proudly. Nobles kneel at his feet. On the surface, it seems unshakable. But in the silence behind those banners, there are whispers. One noble resents the taxes pressed upon his lands. Another feels slighted, ignored at court. A cousin stirs with ambition. A priest wonders aloud if the king's soul is corrupt. And so, though the throne shines in candlelight, its roots are shallow. This was the constant burden of medieval rulers. Not only to defend their kingdoms from enemies across borders, but to defend their crowns from those closest to them. Brothers, cousins, even sons. Advisors, generals, bishops, barons. Any one of them could tilt the throne with a single word, a single act. The fragility was not only in politics. It was in perception. If a king was seen as weak, if his health faltered, if famine struck under his reign, whispers grew louder. Perhaps he is cursed. Perhaps God has withdrawn his favor. perhaps another should rule in his stead. The belief alone was enough to fracture loyalty. 4 crowns were made as much of faith as of gold. Close your eyes again. Imagine a feast in a grand hall. The king raises a goblet, smiles, and the people cheer. Yet at the far end of the table, 2 nobles lean close. Their words are hushed, their glances sharp. By dawn, they may have pledged to another. And the throne, though still shining in firelight, already trembles unseen. History gives us countless reminders of this fragility. Richard II of England, undone by the loyalty of nobles drifting away. Charles VI of France, his madness making the crown an empty shell, ripe for rivals to claim. Byzantine emperors blinded in their beds, replaced before the city even woke. Kings of Norway, Denmark, and Sweden dethroned by their own councils. Everywhere, across the medieval world, the throne was a chair placed upon shifting ground. Even the grandest ceremonies could not hide this truth. A coronation filled with incense and bells. The sacred anointing with holy oil. All of it proclaimed eternity. Divine right. The permanence of rule. And yet, sometimes only a few years later, the same ruler sat imprisoned. Forgotten. Erased. Eternity, in the medieval world, could last only as long as men allowed it to. Close your eyes once more. Think of the fear that must have haunted every ruler at night. As they laid their heads upon silk pillows, surrounded by guards and servants. They must have wondered, which of these men will betray me? Will the goblet I drink tomorrow be pure? Will the doors of my chamber open to loyalty? Or to daggers? The fragility of thrones was not a secret to kings. It was their constant companion. And yet, despite this fragility, they clung to their crowns. For power, even when trembling, was intoxicating. They wore their crowns in public, paraded their banners, demanded oaths of loyalty. But deep down, they knew that their throne was not stone. It was glass. And one blow, one whisper, one betrayal could shatter it overnight. The fragility of thrones is perhaps the greatest truth of the medieval world. That even as kings proclaimed themselves chosen by God, they lived in fear of men. That even as queens ruled in splendor, they were one poisoned cup away from ruin. That every coronation was shadowed by the memory of those who had been dethroned before. And that the weight of a crown was not only gold, but the knowledge that it might not rest upon their head for long. The fragility of thrones was not unique to England, nor to France, nor to Byzantium. It was the shared heartbeat of medieval Europe. Across kingdoms, across languages, across landscapes of stone castles and green fields, crowns glittered, and crowns fell. Not in centuries, but in nights. Not always by armies, but by whispers. Close your eyes. Let us drift first to Scotland, a land of rugged hills and fierce clans. Here, kings ruled not with quiet councils but with blades forever at their sides. The throne of Scotland was rarely steady. Rival clans, rival claimants, rival families made the crown a prize to be seized and defended with blood. Think of Robert the Bruce, whose path to the throne was soaked in betrayal. In 1306, he struck down his rival John Comyn before the altar of a church, his dagger flashing where prayers should have been spoken. That act, half murder, half coup, gave him the crown, but also marked him forever with the stain of blood. Scotland accepted him as king, but never forgot that his throne was won in shadows. Close your eyes again. Now drift south, across mountains, into Spain. There, the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon rose and fell like waves against a shore. In Castile, brothers fought brothers, cousins betrayed cousins, nobles shifted with the wind. One king would rise upon the cheers of the court, only to be undone by dawn. In 1369, Pedro of Castile, remembered as Pedro the Cruel, was betrayed by his half-brother Henry of Trastamara. Dragged from his tent, Pedro was slain with a dagger. His brother then claimed the throne, founding a new dynasty in a single night of blood. And in Aragon, the crown, too, trembled in constant disputes. Kings faced not only rival claimants, but rebellious nobles and restless towns who demanded rights and freedoms. The monarchy was forced again and again to negotiate with powerful cortes, assemblies that could defy and even depose rulers. A coup here was sometimes a blade, but often it was a parchment. A declaration of rebellion read aloud by townsmen, stripping legitimacy from the king overnight. Close your eyes once more. Now drift east, toward Hungary, Poland, and Bohemia. These lands, too, were riddled with sudden shifts. In Hungary, kings were crowned with golden oil one year, and by the next, they were poisoned or betrayed. Polish nobles, the Szlachta, grew powerful enough to choose or unseat kings. Their votes, their agreements, their withdrawals of loyalty could topple a ruler without a single arrow loosed. And in Bohemia, thrones fell to both daggers and sermons. For in times of religious upheaval, the church itself turned the people against kings, and coups unfolded as crusades from within. Everywhere in Europe, the story was the same. The throne was never stone. It was sand, shifting with the tide of loyalty. And the examples stretch endlessly. In Naples, queens were crowned only to be deposed by foreign rivals. In Portugal, succession disputes saw cousins and nephews wrestle violently for the crown. In the Balkans, Czars were betrayed by their own courts, murdered in their own halls, their crowns seized by men who hours earlier had sworn loyalty. Close your eyes again. Picture this shared truth. From the highlands of Scotland to the sunlit courts of Castile. From the busy streets of Florence to the golden halls of Constantinople. The crown was never safe. It glimmered in firelight, but always trembled. And each kingdom, in its own way, proved the same fragile law, that no throne, however high, could stand against the daggers of ambition. This is the lesson of Europe's thrones. That kings and queens, lords and emperors, wore crowns not upon their heads, but upon fragile threads of loyalty. Threads that could be cut in an instant, leaving them not rulers, but prisoners. Not sovereigns, but shadows. When a throne fell overnight, the sound was heard not only in castles. It echoed in cottages, in marketplaces, in fields of grain. Power changed hands in a single night, but the ripples stretched for years. Close your eyes. Picture a family in a small English village. They hear the toll of bells, the cry of heralds announcing a new king. The father looks at his children and wonders, will the taxes grow heavier now? Will soldiers come to take my sons? The mother whispers prayers. For war often followed coups, and war always brought hunger. The children, too young to understand, feel the tension in their parents' silence. This was the cost of a crown shifting, unseen in their homes, but deeply felt in their lives. For when nobles betrayed, and cousins seized crowns, armies often marched. And armies needed food, coin, shelter, which meant peasants were pressed for more. Their harvests seized, their barns emptied, their coin taken in the name of the king. The banners above the castle might change, but the suffering below remained. Close your eyes again. Imagine the fate of servants in a royal court. Last night they poured wine for their master. This morning they are told their master is gone. Some are dismissed, cast out into the streets. Others are imprisoned alongside their lord, guilty by association. Still others are forced to bow before a new ruler, to serve the very man who destroyed the one they once swore to protect. Their loyalty means little. Their survival means everything. Coups tore families apart. A brother on one side of a plot, another remaining loyal to the king. When the coup failed, one was executed, the other shamed for betrayal. Wives lost husbands, children lost fathers, mothers lost sons. And all because ambition pulled crowns from one head to another. Close your eyes once more. Think of the human faces erased from chronicles. The guard slain at a gate because he chose wrongly. The maid executed because she carried a letter she did not understand. The monk tortured for a prophecy misinterpreted. Their names are forgotten. Their lives dissolved. But their suffering was as real as that of kings. Even those who survived carried scars. Servants who once trusted nobles learned never to trust again. Villagers who saw soldiers seize their barns lived with hunger for years. Children who grew up under shifting rulers learned early that loyalty was dangerous, that silence was safer than truth. The human cost was not only death. It was fear. Fear that lived in every hall, every field, every market. Fear that tomorrow's sun might rise on a new king, a new demand, a new war. And yet, life endured. Mothers still baked bread. Fathers still tilled fields. Children still played in the dirt. But always beneath the shadow of crowns. always beneath the knowledge that their lives could change overnight, just as easily as a throne could fall. Close your eyes again. Picture not the king in his gilded chair, but the villager kneeling in his chapel, whispering prayers. He does not pray for crowns, or thrones, or triumphs. He prays only for peace. But peace was fragile in a world where thrones trembled. And so his prayer was often unanswered. This was the human cost of coups. Not the crowns shifting, but the hearts breaking. Not the thrones falling, but the lives unraveling. The price of ambition was paid not only by kings, but by the people who never sought the crown at all. The Middle Ages are long past. The castles crumble, the crowns gather dust in museums, the parchments yellow and fade. Yet the pattern of coups, the sudden fall of power, the throne that topples between dusk and dawn, has never vanished. It lingers still, reshaped for our own age. Close your eyes. Picture the modern world. Capitals lit with neon and glass. Parliaments where laws are debated. Presidents and prime ministers seated behind polished desks. The crowns are gone, yet the fragility remains. For even now, leaders who seem secure at night can wake to find their power gone by morning. The stage is larger, the weapons more complex, but the rhythm is familiar. Generals whispering in barracks. Ministers plotting in chambers. Streets filling with angry crowds. The same shadows that crept through medieval castles creep still through modern palaces. Think of recent decades. Nations where presidents have been deposed overnight. One day their portraits hang in offices, their names spoken with reverence. The next day, their statues are toppled, their names cursed, their offices sealed. The cameras of our age capture what the chroniclers of the Middle Ages once wrote in ink. The flight of exiled leaders, the roar of streets demanding change, the announcement broadcast across radios and screens, the government has fallen. A new power has risen. Close your eyes again. Picture the similarities. In medieval London, a herald cries out in the marketplace, "The king has abdicated. Long live the new king." In modern times, a news anchor declares across the airwaves, "The president has resigned." The military now holds control. Different costumes. Same performance. The fragility of rule whispered across centuries. Consider too how the role of the people has remained. In Constantinople, the crowd in the hippodrome could demand an emperor's fall. In Paris, the mob could storm the palace and end a dynasty. And today, the people still gather. In streets, in squares, in parliaments seized by protest. Their voices rising in unison, their presence making the ground tremble beneath rulers. Whether medieval torchlight or modern phone screens glowing in the night, the power of the crowd remains the same. Close your eyes once more. Think of the images we see in our own century. Leaders fleeing by plane under cover of darkness. Parades once meant to display strength becoming the stage for collapse. The echo is clear. 4 kings once fled castles by horse under moonlight, their crowns left behind in chambers. The pattern repeats. Only the details change. And what of betrayal? In the Middle Ages, it was brothers and cousins who toppled thrones. Today, it may be ministers, generals, or political allies. But the sting is the same. Those once closest, once trusted, turn suddenly into rivals. And in the betrayal of kin or colleague, power is undone overnight. The Church, too, has changed its form but not its shadow. Where once a pope's blessing or curse decided the fate of kings, now international alliances, media voices, or global institutions play the same role. A ruler who loses favor with these powers finds himself vulnerable. For legitimacy still rests not only on force, but on perception. Close your eyes again. Picture how the medieval and the modern merge. A Byzantine emperor blinded in the dark of his palace. A modern president led from his office under guard. Both were rulers yesterday, prisoners today. Both believed their crowns secure. And both discovered the same truth, that no power is eternal. The echo of medieval coups reminds us that fragility is not bound by time. It is woven into the nature of power itself. Whether in thrones or in offices, whether in castles or in glass towers, every leader walks with the shadow of uncertainty. Every government trembles upon the same fragile ground that once shifted beneath kings. And so, the Middle Ages speak to us still. Not as distant tales of knights and crowns, but as mirrors of our own century. For when we watch the news of governments collapsing, of rulers fleeing, of new banners raised, we are watching the same story that once unfolded in torchlit halls. The stage has changed. The players are new. But the play remains the same. The coups of today are the children of the coups of yesterday. And in both, the lesson is clear: power rests never on stone, but on shifting sand. And so, our long walk through shadowed halls and torchlit chambers draws to its close. We have wandered from England's betrayals to France's factions, from the splendor of Florence to the turbulence of Constantinople, from the icy halls of Scandinavia to the dust of Castile. And everywhere, the story has been the same. Thrones glittered, but thrones trembled. Kings dined in splendor at dusk, and by dawn they were prisoners. Queens ruled in majesty, but drank from goblets laced with poison. Brothers swore loyalty in public, and whispered treason in the night. Crowds cheered one ruler one day, and dragged him from power the next. The crowns of medieval Europe were not carved in stone. They were fragile as glass. And coups, sudden, sharp, silent, or bloody, proved again and again that no throne was ever safe. Close your eyes. Picture the halls we have walked tonight. The tapestries, the flickering candles, the whispered conspiracies. Picture the faces. Kings who believed themselves eternal. And then see them fade, their crowns slipping away, their names turned to shadows. For this is the lesson that echoes from the Middle Ages. That power dazzles, but it is never fixed. That crowns shine, but they rest upon trembling ground. That no matter the kingdom, no matter the age, every ruler carries the same burden. The knowledge that all power is temporary. And yet, as we reflect, let the story soften. Let it no longer feel sharp, but gentle. Not a tale of fear, but of understanding. For there is peace in this truth. Peace in knowing that even the greatest storms pass. Peace in knowing that the weight of crowns, though heavy, is not eternal. Peace in seeing that ambition fades, but life endures. Close your eyes again. Breathe slowly. Let the whispers of history drift into silence. The daggers are sheathed, the goblets emptied, the banners lowered. The halls are dark, the fires burn low. And the thrones that once trembled stand only as memories. As you rest, imagine those ruins. A broken castle on a hill, ivy creeping across its stones. Once it echoed with feasts, with oaths, with betrayals. Now it is silent. And in that silence, there is peace. The coups of the past remind us not only of the fragility of power, but of the strength of time. Time that outlasts crowns. Time that erases thrones. Time that softens even the sharpest betrayals. So rest now. Rest as the ruins rest. Rest as the crowns rest in the earth. Rest as the stories rest in memory. The night is yours. The world outside can wait. And in this quiet moment, as history fades to stillness, may you find peace and sleep.